It's 3:15, and that means it's time for
The Real Deal with Bill McNeil.
That's right. Welcome once again to The Real Deal with Bill McNeil. I'm your host, Bill McNeil, and you're probably wondering exactly what is the real deal today.
Hey, good question.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and today we're going to discuss the layoffs that are happening right now at Disney, the impending further layoffs at WarnerMedia, and what effects they are going to have on Marvel and DC Comics. Obviously, those are under the big Disney AT&T umbrellas. WarnerMedia obviously being the media portion of AT&T after their big acquisition of Warner Brothers. Obviously, Disney has been taking an enormous financial haircut. I believe they recorded a 91% decrease in revenue in the second quarter. The parks still aren't open, and if they are open, not all the parks are open, and the ones that are, they are not at full capacity, and people just aren't ready to go back into heavily populated areas, and it is absolutely affecting Disney's bottom line. And they're having a lot of layoffs. So far, they've been focused mostly on the parks, as well as the entertainers. But eventually, this is going to have to trickle down to Marvel as Disney starts cutting some of the fat, cutting some costs, as they kind of have to hunker down as there's a lot of uncertainty. Over at DC, it's a little bit different. WarnerMedia's already had a lot of layoffs, and DC had a lot of those, most notably in their editorial staff, but they did lose some senior people. Publisher Bob Harris kind of being the biggest name, but they also lost a couple of other very tenured people at DC Comics. Probably not a lot left to cut off not a lot of meat to cut off the bone over there at DC, unfortunately. But they are also cutting back jobs because of the abysmal, and I do mean abysmal, rollout of HBO Max. Obviously, when AT&T acquired Warner Brothers to become not only a communications company but a media company, streaming is the way of the future. They were rolling out HBO Max, lots of new programming, things like that. They obviously launched after Disney Plus, which saw enormous subscriber gains during the pandemic. HBO Max did not see that at all. I believe last time I checked, half of the people that are even eligible to use HBO Max don't even have a password. They don't even log in and use the service. It's been rolled out terribly. It's been marketed very ineffectively. There's not enough content for families, not a lot of family friendly content on there. I believe that they kind of wanted to market it kind of as like the HBO of streaming service, where HBO has always been that, that really premium product, that premium channel that costs a lot more than the others. While their streaming service, HBO Max, costs a lot more than the others, but you don't get a lot of the kids' content. Now, there's a lot of great content. Obviously, they have all that wonderful HBO content, as well as the other content they acquired when they got Warner Brothers. But the rollout's been atrocious, and they have not seen the gains they expected. So all their further restructuring they're doing is in support of HBO Max, but also because of the terrible rollout of HBO Max. So it's the wave of the future, but it's absolutely been a curse on them thus far. And I'm going to bring in Perch here in a few minutes. We're going to kind of talk about the issues at hand. He's going to give his perspective, and we're going to talk about kind of the leadership teams at Marvel and DC. What can we expect, as the fallout from the layoffs at Disney? How can we expect that to affect Marvel Comics? How can we expect the layoffs or the impending restructure? I believe they said they're going to cut 20% of costs over at WarnerMedia. How's that going to further affect DC Comics? Obviously, they've already had a big amount of layoffs. They lost a lot of editors. They lost some senior people. What else can they lose? Is it going to be a change of direction? Are there going to be more layoffs at DC Comics? What's it going to be? So Perch is going to join me here in a few minutes. He's going to give me his perspective on that as well. Very interesting stuff, very trying times. Obviously, the pandemic has been, it has significantly hurt a lot of business across the world in the United States, specifically entertainment. And obviously, Disney, WarnerMedia are a huge part of that. And streaming is the future. And we'll see what all this means. Now let's bring Perch on the channel and kind of get his perspective on what all this is, on what all could happen in the future at Marvel and DC Comics due to the unrest at Disney and WarnerMedia. So welcome to the channel, Perch. Today we're going to talk about some of the recent things that have been happening at WarnerMedia, Disney, that are going to potentially likely affect DC Comics and Marvel Comics, those being kind of the parent companies. First, we're going to talk about DC Comics. Marvel Comics. As far as Disney, we know that they laid off like 28,000 people at the end of last month. Just within the last 48 hours, they laid off an additional like 720 like live acting workers. Mm-hmm. Things aren't looking good for Disney. I believe they saw like a 91% drop in revenue in their second quarter due to the pandemic. The parks really haven't come back online everywhere, and even though in the places that they haven't really started making money yet.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, a theme park like that, it takes a lot of operational costs just to have it up and moving. So if you don't have full capacity, it's going to be hard to break even. And I think, you have to start somewhere, and they're slowly getting there. But yeah, I mean, Disney's a lot of revenue came from their films and their parks, and both of those are at a standstill right now.
And it's crazy. And you think about, with the parks, they're not making revenue, but it still has a tremendous amount of operating costs.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they can't go full shutdown. And if they do have some people there because they're trying to ease back into things. But if we do head into the winter, if we do get an administration change that's going to change the policies and the guidelines, almost certainly for more restrictive, based on what's been said, then the timeline for Disney getting back up to full speed could be a very, very long time. You've got Dr. Fauci out saying 2022 possibly before things are back to normal. The idea that you're going to survive another year and a half with this kind of loss is daunting. Now Disney can do it. They're a big enough brand, a large enough company that they can borrow and they can shut down and they can lay off and they can do other things to kind of survive. But it's not a healthy survival. And they will cut everything they can along the way.
Well, that brings us to Marvel. They're, the leader of Marvel Comics itself, the figurehead is kind of C.B. Cebulski, the EIC. But Kevin Feige was named like the chief creative officer of all things Marvel. Dan Buckley is the president of Marvel Entertainment. He was the president of Marvel Comics. Obviously, he has a hand in the comics division still as well. Are these the right guys for the job? And what do you think they need to do to mitigate the losses? There's definitely going to be more layoffs and firings, even past the ones that we just saw.
Yeah, there definitely will be. And Kevin Feige's position, I think, is quite safe, all things considered. He will start to pivot to manage more of the properties on Disney Plus now that they're getting that going. And basically he becomes one of the people Disney has to make money. And he has proven he can do that. So for anything else, Kevin Feige has shown he actually has the ability to turn a profit and make good decisions and profit and money. The others, I think, is a much more dodgy proposition. I do think that there's a long-awaited leadership change that's coming to Marvel. We've heard a lot of words about that, and I think that is coming imminently. I don't know if it will hit both these people, but I'm willing to bet it hits at least one, as well as others within the Marvel entity. The funny thing about Marvel right now, if you think about it, is there's a report yesterday that the publisher that does Harry Potter, despite the fact that there was a big boycott called and everything else, is seeing the highest sales that they have seen in a decade. And the pandemic we're seeing massive book sales, people flocking to this kind of entertainment. So Marvel should be able to kind of basically pat itself on the back and say that they are also part of that their comic sales are up and their trade sales are up and they're getting a lot of things out there. This should be a time where they can actually, make a difference and make some money. But that has not been the case. As we talked about in a previous show, they're making money in some areas, but they're still not moving the needle in a significant way. So that's going to lead for more layoffs.
Well, certainly. Now let's go over to WarnerMedia. They have a plan to cut thousands of jobs. They want to cut costs by 20% across the board due to the pandemic. Now, their issues are different. They have a lot of television channels and properties like that. We know revenues for for advertising are down, but they do not have the operating costs of like a Disney World or a Disneyland. But obviously they are part of AT&T, and they launched HBO Max, and the reception has been tepid, to say the least. They put way too high a price point on it. There's not enough content on there for children, which is really why Disney Plus really gained such traction. Just as a streamer myself, I want lots of programming for children. HBO Max does not have that. I think they thought of this was be like a premium brand, like their HBO channel has been, since the 80s. It just has not translated for HBO Max at all. And they're putting all their focus on HBO Max because they know they bungled the launch.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think HBO Max it's fitting in a weird place. It has not distinguished itself. It's a little bit like Amazon Prime without the benefit of, a lot of people are forced in some cases to shop with Amazon. So, that is a natural tie-in for them. But it hasn't found its own identity yet. And I think it's there. I think they have enough content, enough material, enough history that they could kind of shuffle things and go out with a different approach. But it is a confusing platform. It hasn't landed with a lot of customers yet. And you have, like you said, I think you said it perfectly. Netflix is commissioning a ton of kid content in addition to everything else they're doing. Disney Plus, of course, has tons of kid content. You have a lot of people stuck at home with their kids. So, I mean, it's a no-brainer that those things are going to, those kind of diversified options are going to work really well right now. So HBO Max has some work to do. I mean, ultimately, they're part of AT&T. AT&T needs to be in the streaming space. They're not going to cut HBO Max because it's critical for them to be playing in that space, especially now where this is one of the areas that is, a place to get profit and a place to distribute movies. So they see it as critical. But more changes are going to have to come. And I think even despite the heavy layoffs that WarnerMedia did, there's probably still a lot of, quote unquote, synergy firings that are coming.
So as far as DC Comics goes, they recently hired Daniel Cherry III as the DC GM. He's kind of like, one of the figureheads. He's going to be doing a lot of the marketing efforts. Jim Lee is essentially the chief creative officer of like DC characters across everything for WarnerMedia. And Pam Lippert is the president of Warner Brothers Global Brands. And I think it's entertainment. There's another part of her job title that I couldn't fit in there, but she's essentially the liaison between WarnerMedia and DC Comics. And this is kind of the leadership team that they have. They obviously did have layoffs. They called it Bloody Monday or Bloody whatever it was. But there's going to be more. There has to be. There's no way that they're just going to cut all those costs and cut jobs out of other parts of WarnerMedia that have been more profitable without cutting a little piece off of DC as well, right?
No, absolutely. There definitely are going to be additional cuts. Now DC, like with Marvel, both employ a ton of freelance talent and independent contractors. And so when those people do not get picked up for more work, that isn't considered a cut. They just don't get more work. So what's going to be cut are the staff jobs, places in editorial, places in distribution and shipping, perhaps some of the marketing staff. But generally, DC and Marvel both, they don't have a huge staff in that area. There's certainly, bloat, but there's just not the numbers to do much cutting. In terms of the upper management, DC has already, by and large, done that. I think Daniel Cherry, Jim Lee, Pam Lippert, they're not going anywhere. They've already made their changes. So I think they're in a bit of a different situation. I think what you will see is more staff jobs cut at DC, not as heavy, because again, they don't have much to cut. But I think in general with WarnerMedia, you're going to see a lot more in other departments, less at DC, and you're just going to see a much smaller DC ultimately.
Yeah, I think they're mostly going to be pivoting a lot to like the YA graphic novels and trying to get those digital efforts going, which they put a lot more focus on than Marvel so far.
Yeah, they absolutely will. And they'll have a smaller, streamlined core line that, is not all bad. I think, a lot of people I see complaining about that right now are the same people who complained about there being just way too many comics on the shelves. And I side with that opinion. I think there has been. When you're shipping 80, 90, 100 comics in a month, you're shipping just way too much for your audience to consume. So, slimming that down while painful is probably a good approach.
Well, Perch, I do appreciate you coming on the channel kind of talking about how the financial woes at Disney, the financial woes at WarnerMedia, the way they're they're kind of reconsolidating and changing their efforts are going to affect Marvel Comics, DC Comics in the future. Is there anything else that you needed to cover before we kind of wrap this up?
No, I appreciate you having me on. It's going to be interesting next 2 months to watch. I think a lot of these changes will shake out before the end of the year. So, hope it all lands well for people, and certainly anybody losing their job. It's a tough time. So hopefully there's a bounce back.
Thank you very much, brother.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.